Well, like Lee said, my name is James Holland. My full name is Burns James Holland. My family called me BJ. But when I got older, I thought, BJ is not kind of a kid's name. I don't think I'm going to use that. I went with James. And it gets confusing because some people call me Burns. So you might know me as Burns, or you might know me as James. And if you're a family member, BJ. So I'm going to share my testimony. I'm just going to pray first before I start. And it's great that I know so many people here. I didn't realize I was going to know half the people in this room. And a lot of you might not have ever heard my testimony before or know anything about me. But now you will. Lord Jesus, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for each attendee here tonight, Lord, that you just bless them. Lead me and guide me as I speak, Lord, as I share my life story, my testimony, Lord. It's really just your testimony and your work in my life and how you guided me. And Lord, I pray I'm clear about it, and I honor you, and I honor this group of people as well. Amen. Amen. So, like Lee said, I'm a real East Coaster. I really grew up on the East Coast, so if you have any feelings about people from the East, I'm from the heart of the East. And I make apologies for my East Coastfulness if there's any issues there. But I'm from a wonderful place. We live in a wonderful country. I've visited, I've spent time in every province in Canada. I'm lucky I haven't lived, but I've traveled and lived in a lot of pretty much every province in Canada at some point in my life. So we have a wonderful country, whether you're from the East, whether you're from the West, bilingual, get a job, work for the government. It's just sort of a mandatory thing there, whereas in Quebec it's the same thing. You have to at least speak French, if not be bilingual, to work there. So, my birth parents, when I was young, my family lived in, both families lived in New Brunswick, but my parents got married in the mid-70s, and they had me in the late 70s, and they ended up separating. So they separated when I was about 4.5 years old, and my brother was just an infant. In fact, my brother was an infant. He was actually not even born when my parents began the separation process. If you know anything about divorce is a really hard thing for young people. It's a really hard thing for young boys. My dad really struggled with addictions issues. That's the reason why the divorce was initiated, is because Dad had some pretty serious addiction issues. And my mom eventually hit a spot where she just couldn't live with this guy anymore. He was drug dealing, he was drinking. My dad was a drug runner, meaning he would cross the border with drugs. He did some really dangerous things back then. So my earliest memory, one of my earliest memories, is my dad sitting me down in my bed and explaining to me that he was leaving, and that my mom wanted him to go, and that I was now going to be kind of the guy of the house. I was going to be there to help with my mom and help with my brother. And I remember clearly just having him say this to me. And having it sort of, looking back on it now, it really sort of cemented my identity. I can almost see from that point forward in my life, it really had a major effect on me. The fact that one of the last things he said to me when I was a child was this: you're going to have to help with your mom. You're going to have to help raise your brother. I'm not going to be with you anymore. I love you, but I'm not going to live with you anymore. So I remember that being one of my earlier memories. For all intents and purposes, he left my life at that point, all but completely. He did return sporadically, every once in a while, Dad would just show up. So my mom wouldn't really tell me that he was coming, because he wasn't a super reliable guy, right? So every once in a while, I'd be sitting somewhere, and all of a sudden Dad would just come out of nowhere, and I'd be like, "Whoa, Dad, you're back." But it was just because they didn't want to get their hopes up, right? If you're a single mom, and if you've ever raised children, you usually, if you tell a child that their dad's coming, they'll wait all day. They'll wait all day for that person to come, and if they don't come, it's incredibly disappointing and hurtful. So they just wouldn't tell us, right? So that was an early memory. My dad, though, eventually He did enter a recovery program in the early 80s, and he had, different levels of effectiveness there through recovery. He did AA for a short time, and we'll kind of revisit him in a second. In general, our family has some serious addictions issues on both sides. So sort of out of control, unresolved addiction issues that are probably, leading to some really serious problems within our family. I would even go so far as to say the issues that our family faced as far as addictions goes are deadly. So it's actually, I'd say our family has such a problem with addictions that if not leading to their death, it would really shipwreck their life and cause them major health issues. So we had a lot of family members that were suffering from that kind of thing. Probably a lot of it was, in retrospect now, probably a lot of it's connected to mental health. So a lot of mental health issues in our family, disorder, schizophrenia. When I was, in a moment I'll be sharing about my time in the mental hospital. I'm a diagnosed schizophrenic, where I was when I was in the 90s in the hospital. My brother has a bipolar diagnosis, or he did when he was alive. My brother was diagnosed with bipolar. He was untreated, so he was diagnosed with bipolar, but he didn't get treatment for it. And you'll see what happens there. Our family philosophy on forgiveness and unforgiveness is also a major issue in our life. It affected our family, our living, our recreation, our working together as a family, our times together as a family. So we had a lot of issues on both sides. Our roles and relationships as parents and children were really affected. As we grew up, I could see it was a major issue. I think mental health was a major issue for our family. We grew up in a time, like, if you think back to the 70s and 80s, anything that dealt with mental health in that time was had a bit of a stigma attached to it still. I mean, even to this day it still does, but I mean, today we have a lot more awareness and a lot more advocacy for mental health issues, but back then there was none. So for, like, let's say my brother get diagnosed with bipolar in the 90s, well, that was still a pretty edgy time to have that. So the idea that he just didn't want treatment for this made sense, now that I think back about it. I really pray that's not the case anymore, for you especially. So my brother Josh, let's talk about him. I'm from a family of two, so there's me and my brother Josh, and raising him was hard because he was a really tough kid, especially for a single mom. So Josh was raised by my mom. I was right there the whole time. He had some serious health issues apart from the mental health thing. And any single mother that raises a child, you know how difficult it can be. And the same thing with single dads, but when you're raising children and one of them has some kind of disability, some kind of mental health issue, it actually just, it's like pouring gas on an already flammable situation. It really ignites that situation, makes it harder. My mom really struggled. In retrospect, I had a lot of resentment towards her, but now that I think about it, my mom was just keeping her head above the water most of the time when we were growing up. It was very difficult. And I remember having to take long drives to these hospitals in order for my brother to get treatment for allergies and different health issues that he had. So it was a real single mother experience that I had when I was young. I have a really good mom. My mom, as far as I know, has never come to Christ. She's never given her life to the Lord or, explored a spiritual relationship with the Lord beyond. She's a Catholic, and she's a very sort of like kept Catholic in the sense that she's, it's very personal for her. Like, she doesn't really talk about it that much, and I have a feeling there's not maybe a deep faith there right now. I have wonderful grandparents. I actually feel like my grandparents really were Christian people. They really did love the Lord. And I actually feel as though I'll probably see them someday again. Love them very much. They were very good to small children, but as I grew up into my teen years, my grandparents and my mom and my family, they didn't really know how to handle me or my brother. And as we got older, things got more difficult. I entered into I want to call it a cultural outgroup. You guys know what I mean by that? in-group would just be like, typical teenager, typical kids growing up, the in-crowd, people getting along quite well, doing well in school. I was not really part of that group. I was part of more of the out-crowd. And the out-crowd was like, people into punk music, and people into metal, or people who were like stoners and pot smokers and stuff. I probably geared more towards that crowd in my teen years. I grew up sort of a countercultural lifestyle almost, socially out-grouped, not really part of the in-crowd at all. I was really into comic books and music and skateboarding and Dungeons and Dragons. I even tried a Ouija board. Keep in mind, when I was a child, when I was young, I was like not involved in church at all. I had gone to the Catholic Church, but I had really walked away. So I was willing to try anything. Spiritual, I got into all kinds of things that in retrospect, I think, wow, that was, I would never have done that had I known the truth when I was younger. My mom had boyfriends as we grew up, and as she did, they kind of became surrogate fathers for a while, and it never works out when that is the situation. Especially when you're young and you just see a person that's not your dad in your house, and then he leaves, and then there's maybe somebody else who's not your dad in the house, and then he leaves. There was one good guy, and he came along, he stayed with us for quite a while, and he was a pretty solid guy, and I appreciated him still to this day, but overall it was never ideal. Obviously in a single parent home, when you invite a new boyfriend or girlfriend into the house, the children usually don't always respond super well. And I gotta say, my mom didn't handle that super good. As a result, some, tempers flared and things like that took place. When I was young, I was exposed to, I know there's children here, but I'm just gonna spell it, P-O-R-N, and it was not a good thing for me. It really colored my view of women. I won't say a lot about that, but what it did is it just sort of drove another wall between me and my friend group at the time. Didn't know how to relate to girls very well as a result. And I kept my distance. And it's weird to look back now because I actually was in a class, very vividly remember being in a class with a group of girls. I was in a biology class. And now that I look back, I think this group of girls was like a group of believers, like a group of girls, like students who were from a Christian family. And they were wonderful people to talk to, and I could tell they were enjoying their time at school, and I was miserable. But in retrospect, they were part of a prayer group, and I just remember thinking, man, it was too bad that I was like so shy around girls at that age, because I might have been able to talk to them, and maybe they would have encouraged me in the Lord at that point. But as I only think about that in retrospect now, I was too shy, is basically what I'm getting at there. Would have benefited me to get to know those girls. Anyway, I graduated in the 90s, mid-90s, from Bathurst High School, and I worked really hard as I finished high school. I really kind of turned my life around slightly academically, and I realized if I really work hard, I could probably get out of Bathurst, and I could probably go on and do something that was not the best thing to do, but that's what I chose to do. Dalhousie University in Halifax is what I chose to go to. I wanted to move to Halifax at the time. There was a real thriving music scene in Halifax in the 90s, and I wanted to be part of that. And I ended up being part of it, and it didn't work out so good for me, but at the time it seemed very attractive. So I uprooted from Bathurst, my parents drove me, and I lived in Halifax. But what happened was, as I got there, this whole counterculture experience that I was going through in my teens was basically just suddenly ramped up to 100, because now I'm surrounded. I mean, if you guys have ever been to Halifax, it's a university city. Do you know what I mean by that? There are 8 major universities in Halifax. Half of the population of that city is like 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds. All of them partying, experimenting, trying to go to class, trying to get a career, trying to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend. It's just a crazy place to live. Halifax is just like a crazy city, especially during school, And so I lived there for a couple of years, and I went to school there. I attended, it was the 1995-96 school year that I moved there. I got even heavier into drug abuse, which had started when I was living in Bathurst. I started drinking more. I started to meet people who were into countercultural movements, and I remember every night I would be at a club somewhere, watching a band, or getting drunk downtown, or hanging out with. It was a lot like you hear about hippie movements, from the 1960s. It had a little bit of that feel to it. So we would all hang out at the library, the library had this massive garden, and you'd see kids just during the day all hanging out there and wearing hippie clothes. It was a really interesting time. And I remember just being part of it and just being like, wow, I'm experiencing something unique here. But behind the scenes, I was getting into heavier drugs. I was drinking more, I was spending money. I was missing out on opportunities to go to school. I would like ditch class. And you know, if you've been to university, you know how expensive it is, right? Well, I was like ditching classes to go and do just silly things, ridiculous things. So obviously my grades did not do well at all. So within a year, I had left school altogether. So I only was in that university for a year before I really tanked. My life was really on a downward spiral at that point, just because of the addictions issues. So I did keep going to class for a while. The drinking, the pot smoking. I ended up meeting a girl, I had a girlfriend during that time. It turns out, and I thought this was great at the time, she was a practicing witch. And she would take me to these witchcraft things, and there was a store in Halifax where you could buy witchcraft things, and she would tell me all about this. And I'm painting the picture. Things got pretty dark for me at that time. I thought I was doing really well, but I was not doing well. So there's this like layers and layers of things that I was going through at the time. So things got so bad, my family actually stepped in. They could tell that things were getting pretty dark for me in Halifax, and I was getting kind of out of control. My family stepped in, and I remember one day my mom just showed up in Halifax with a giant truck. And I had moved there, so all my stuff was in Halifax. My mom just showed up with a giant truck, and she's like, I'm taking you, we're leaving. And so we piled all of my stuff in this truck, and she drove me back to New Brunswick, which is where we're from. And I remember just thinking, wow, I've really hit rock bottom here. Like, all my plans to go to school, all my plans to, at the time I was taking a science degree program, so I was actually thinking about pre-med. I was thinking about doing science, doing biology. It was like my favorite subject at the time. Yeah, it was just like the toilet had flushed for me at that point, like literally. So mom showed up, loaded everything to the truck. Again, I'm still struggling with these addictions issues. And we head back home. And within a few months of that, my family had communicated to me that I was in really rough shape and they didn't know what to do with me. Now my dad, here's where he re-enters the picture. He had gone through recovery, had been remarried, and moved to Yorkton, here in Saskatchewan. And he had started a business, a construction business, my dad's a carpenter. And his wife, who's a teacher, started working on the reserve, one of the reserves in Saskatchewan. And they said, you know what, you can come out. You can start again. And I said, all right. So that's what I did. Within a few months, and a lot of fighting and a lot of crying, I decided to move out here. And that was in 1996. So again, I'm migrating again. I'm flying to Saskatchewan. I'm going to try something different. But guess what happened? The exact same thing. Nothing changed. Everything that happened to me, from Halifax to Bathurst, just followed me to Yorkton. And things got even darker. Things got even worse. I know. I moved to Saskatchewan in 96 to try to escape everything that was going on, try to live with my dad, try to stabilize my family life. I'm good, great. He had remarried. By the way, he remarried, and I had a new brother and a new sister. So through this new marriage, and I'm still close with my brother anyway. But anyway, I ended up meeting the same group of people I knew in Halifax and Bathurst, only this time, now I'm right in there with the drug dealers, okay? So I'm hanging out with drug dealers, I'm partying with drug dealers, I'm partying with people who use heavy drugs, and I'm thinking, for some reason at this point in my life, I actually think this is a good thing. For some reason in my thinking, I go back to that time sometimes and I'm like, I thought it was pretty cool. Look at me, look what I've achieved in life, Oh man, I don't know why I felt that way, but I did. And so I was hanging out with one of the worst drug dealers in Yorkton at the time. And I won't say the guy's name because maybe he's still doing it. I'm not actually sure. I've been out of touch there for a while, but he liked me. I was like the kind of guy who was, when I was using or drinking, I was just like the life of the party. I really was. they loved having me around. Like, they knew if I was going to drink or get high, in Yorkton anyway, it's going to be a party. Let's invite everybody, because, James is here, and we've got drugs. It's going to be great. So this would happen often, and obviously, I lived with my parents for a short time in Yorkton, my dad and his new wife, but they finally were like, wow, this guy, like, there's just no way we can have him in the house with 2 small children, and we're trying to work and run a business and teach. You gotta go. So I at the time I was like, yeah, you're right, I should go. So I did. I moved out, I lived with some friends, I lived on the streets a bit. But yeah, I just lived to use. I had gotten a job. I worked at Superstore in Yorkton. That was my first job when I moved to Yorkton. And I just kept it. I was baking. So I was like up every night baking, go home, sleep for a couple hours, and then we go wander around Yorkton, partying, doing whatever. I'm at the actual rock bottom by this point. I'm essentially a homeless person. Like, I would love to see some pictures of me from this time, to be honest. I'm really curious about what I must have looked like, because I just remember being there and just being exhausted. That's one thing that I think it hit me today as I was kind of recalling some of this stuff. When you're in a position where you're using, you're struggling with mental health, you're struggling with addictions, and you are not looking after yourself, your relationships, I gotta tell you one thing that happens, and we don't often think about it, is you get exhausted. I had never been so tired in my entire life as I was at that point. I remember waking up, having slept all night, and I start wandering wherever I slept on someone's couch, and wandering around that Yorkton at night or during the day, and I was like so tired. It was overwhelming how tired I was. And it didn't matter how much I slept. It didn't matter where I chased down some food to eat. None of that mattered to me. I was using, I was drinking, and I was exhausted. And that was my life. It was just a cycle of exhaustion and drug use. So yeah, I was experimenting with different things. I met some really rough people. I would say I was essentially homeless. I was really thin. I looked pretty scraggly. People would drive by and yell at me out of the car, they'd drive by and yell at me. They'd say mean things to me, or they'd make fun of me because I was just this random sort of homeless looking guy in the street. And you know what? You probably see something like that in Regina right now. I don't know if you guys know this, but you probably do if you drive through North Central. I see people all the time that remind me of the way I used to look and what I used to be like, just on Fifth Avenue, or just over here on Fifth Avenue, or in North Central. I see it all the time, and I know I'm not that guy anymore, but it really does bring me back. I meet people like that sometimes too. I really feel for them. My clothes were torn. I was scraggly. I would get up in the morning and I would walk to the superstore to do my bakery shift so I could get my measly little money to be able to buy drugs. So one night the cops picked me up, and they just picked me up. There was no reason to pick me up. I remember a cop pulling over and saying, dude, who are you? Where are you going? And I said, I'm just going to work. And they said, oh, well, we'll give you a ride. And the guy felt bad for me, so he gave me a ride to work. I think he might have wanted to see if I actually did work at Superstore. Now that I think about it, he was probably like, you work at Superstore? I shop at Superstore. Are you sure you work there? Anyway, he gave me a ride to Superstore, and I did go to work. I knew the code to get in the building and everything, so I really did work there. So, again, on the streets, straggly clothes, thin as a rail, my face all sunken in, my hair long and scraggly. I had no money. By the way, I still had to pay back my student loans, right? So any little money I had, my bank or whatever was just taking that money to pay off the student debt I had when I was in Halifax, because that was only a year before, right? I couldn't get enough sleep. The friends I was with, I don't know if you've ever been part of this world of addictions, and this world of using and drinking. The friends you make in that world, they're there to help you. They're just as helpless as you are. They're just as vulnerable as you are. And we were all just what a crew. We were part of the underground of Yorkton. And I'm not bragging. It was a dark group. So the people I was with at the time, they were, I would say now that I think back, they were probably doing better than me slightly. And I remember one night, after a massive party, and we were all partying, and I was dancing around the living room, and I stopped at about 6 in the morning, or maybe 4 in the morning, And I looked at the ones that I was kind of the most familiar with, and I said, you know what? I think there's something really wrong with me. I think my thinking has come to a place where I just feel like I'm going to lose my mind, something's going to break inside me. I'm really in trouble. I think I'm a really messed up person. And I was saying this to a room full of addicts. They all looked at me and went, yeah. I think you're right. That's what one of them said. I really think there's something wrong. And I was like, you think? And they're like, yeah. So imagine, the worst of the worst are looking at me and going, yeah, no, there is something wrong with that guy. You know? There really is something up with this. He's really having a hard time. He's really come to the end of himself. This guy's really lost his mind. And when that conversation took place, it really hit me like, you guys aren't doing, that great either. But they were like, no, you're doing really bad. So I was like, I don't know what to do. And they were like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe in this situation, you go see a doctor. Maybe you should take me to the hospital. And they said, yeah, we should totally take you to the hospital. And we had this old beater car that one of them owned, and so we all jumped in it. I remember all my friends jumped in this car, and they were like, we're going to take you to the emergency room. And I said, all right. So they drove me to the emergency room, and they basically pulled up in front of the Yorkton Regional. I got out of the car, and they just drove away. And they left me there. They kind of watched, I think they watched me kind of get to the door, and then they just left, right? And I can't blame them. I probably would have done the exact same thing, right? At the time, really high, really drunk at the time. Partying all night. Partying is not the word, but just being crazy all night. So anyway, I walked into the emergency room. I remember the nurse said, you here to see a doctor? I said, yeah, I think I need to talk to a doctor. And she's like, all right. Any particular thing? I said, I was struggling with bad thoughts. And they said, well, we're going to bring in the psychiatrist and the psychiatric ER doctor to talk to you. And I said, all right. So they brought me into this room, and this guy talked to me for like, about 2 minutes. And he was like, you're in. We're going to take you into intake because you sound like you're doing not so good. I mean, just the look at me probably was enough. But he admitted me. I spent, long story short there, what had basically happened was they brought me in. There was a unit there, a psychiatric unit called Pine Unit, and they said, we got a room for you. You're going to go straight to the psychiatric unit. My family didn't know where I was, by the way, at this point. They had really kind of put up some walls and some boundaries there. I hadn't spoken to my family, so I was just on my own in this psychiatric hospital. Now, when I first moved to Saskatchewan, my family, because they were worried about this addiction issue that I was suffering with, they had enrolled me in addictions counseling. So I was actually, before I basically was kind of kicked out of my parents' house, there was a few times where I went to see an addictions counselor, kind of like a doctor. And she had introduced me, and this is where the story gets cool, to a group of people she worked with who were actually born-again Christian people. And they were all working together at Parkland Regional Addictions Counseling Services. And I know these people to this day, by the way. I still know them, I still talk to them. This group of Christians who worked at this addictions counseling unit, they had met me, and they kind of wrote my name down somewhere, and they kind of kept tabs on me, because they kind of, maybe, I don't know, maybe they thought something was really wrong, or something was really good about me, I don't know, but they had kind of made a note, James Holland, keep in touch with that guy. So sure enough, my first month in this hospital, I was getting visits from them. They had heard I was in there, and they would come and see me, and they would tell me about the Lord, and I'd be like, oh, the Lord, eh? Who is that? I gotta tell you, where I come from, it's heavily Catholic. I actually didn't barely know any Christian people, real Christian people, when I lived in New Brunswick, and there is a real sentiment among young people that we just hate the church. We hate Christians. I grew up with this. I grew up with being resentful towards Christian people. My family were Catholic. It didn't matter to me. I've had friends who vandalized the Catholic Church when we were young. We thought that was a great idea. We just didn't like Christians when we were young. It was just the thing. So as these people are telling me about Jesus and the Lord and the Bible, I'm kind of going, oh man, really? You guys want to talk about that? Well, I don't come from a place where any of this is good news. I don't come from a place where this means anything good to me. In fact, I developed this sort of thick skin towards Christians and ministry. So what I did is, I kind of thought, so I'm in such bad shape, I'll listen to anything. So sure enough, these people were coming, they tell me about the Lord, they pray for me, and they'd meet with me while I was in the psychiatric hospital, and sure enough, I said, all right, let's try this. I'll try prayer. How about that? So I prayed with them, tried praying on my own. Now, I don't know how long I was in there. I spent probably more than a month in the psychiatric hospital, but early in my time there, I said to the Lord, I said, all right, Lord Jesus, if you will, if this is true, God, come and show me. And this unique thing happened to me. I was alone in my room. And by the way, in the psychiatric hospital, you're not allowed to have anything in your room. Okay? You can't have anything sharp or wires or anything like that that you can hurt yourself with. So I'm alone, and all I have is a Bible. They left me the NAS Bible. And I thought, okay, Lord Jesus, if this is real, I'm interested because I've tried everything else. I've been around the block. I've lived all over Canada. I'm willing to try something new, something different. And that night, I'd say it was around 6:30, and it was in around October, November time of year. I remember getting dark in my room, and I sensed this presence enter my room. An incredible presence. And I'd like to call it a pressure, and I don't mean that in the sense of pressure to do something or a pressure to perform some kind of trick. It was just a sensation of pressure entered my room. And I opened my eyes and I could see the pressure almost, and I know that sounds strange, but it's almost like visible to me. And I felt it press down upon me in the same way that a grape or an orange or something that's being ground and gives out juice. Does that make sense? That sensation filled me, only not painful. So I felt this incredible pressure enter into my heart, into my body, and I just felt this outpouring of something in my heart, in my life. I felt this floodgate almost inside of me just open up. And it lasted for hours. And I'm the kind of guy who, when something strange happens, I assume everybody knows what's going on. So I'm like, everybody, are you guys all seeing this? And I was in a mental hospital, right? So I was surrounded by people who, would have either agreed with me or not have been able to talk to me, So, because it was some real characters I was in there with. I felt this incredible sensation. To be honest, I think I went and peeked out in the hallway. It was, a certain time of day we weren't allowed to talk to each other. But I just had this incredible pressure come on me. And I was filled with something. I was filled to overflowing with something. And just to jump ahead, this sensation lasted about 6 days. And I remember feeling achy for 6 days. I just felt like, you guys ever exercise? And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. Do you honestly exercise? And if you do you do sit-ups? These ones. These ones here? You lay on the floor and do that. They're called crunches, right? I do them sometimes, not enough. But if you've ever done them a lot, you know the sensation in your chest and in your diaphragm. You just get that tightness. I had that feeling after this night. I had this incredible stiffness all through my body for about 6 days. I knew it was real. I knew what happened to me was real. And I decided, you know what, I'm probably not going to tell everybody this. I'm in a mental hospital, so if I go around telling everybody a strange green pressure entered my room and now my belly hurts, if I said that, maybe, I don't know, the nurses would have misinterpreted what I was saying. But when the Christians came to visit me, which they were doing, they were showing me scriptures in the Bible, talking to me about Jesus. I didn't even know the gospel. So if you guys, the idea of preaching the gospel, I didn't even know what that was until I moved to Saskatchewan, to be honest. Well, they came and told me the story of Jesus, the crucifixion, the resurrection, the forgiveness of sin, salvation, being born again. They started to explain all these things to me. So, and they had a captive audience, right? Because I would just say, come in, and they would come in and they would just tell me everything. I was eating it up, just eating it up. It was a wonderful thing. That lasted, they were eventually going to medicate me because in order for my psychiatrist to release me, I had to be on antipsychotics at the time. So I hadn't been on the drugs yet. They hadn't started the drugs with me to treat me yet. And so I ended up going along with a lot of the diagnosis stuff that they gave me at the time, but for better or for worse. But I know that 1 month or that 6 weeks I spent in the hospital, it was the time I needed to dry out, to get my head around this thing that had happened to me, and enough time for them to come visit me. My family found out where I was. They would come and see me. My dad sat me down again, just like he had when I was a small child. He sat me on the bed with me. It's weird how this happened. It's almost mirrored my 4.5-year-old experience. And he said, I love you. You're my son. You're going to be okay. I remember these conversations. By the way, my dad, not a Christian at the time. I believe he gave his life to the Lord, but not at that point. But he was just speaking as a father would to his son. And he said, I love you. I'm with you. I know you've been on the streets, and I know the kind of life you've led, but I don't care. I love you, and we want you to come home. We love you. We're inviting you back with the family, essentially. And I said, oh gosh, I can't believe this is happening. My whole life changed, is the long and short. This month I spent in this hospital, this experience I had with the Lord, it 180'd me. And I guarantee you, I have not been the same since. I haven't been the same person. So Lynette interviewed me a few years ago on a TV show, because Lynette does a TV show. Or did anyway, and probably should continue to do it. But I remember thinking when we interviewed, she asked me what my life was like before and after my salvation experience. And I remember thinking, that's a good question. Actually, I would say it's hard to even remember in a lot of ways what it was like to be the person I was before that day. And yeah, thank you. It's really hard. I am not the same man I was, and it isn't because of anything I did. It's not some book I read, other than the Bible. It's not some philosophy or yoga, and I don't have anything against any of those things. But I tried a bunch of things in my life. I really experimented with a lot of stuff. I had been in university, I was an educated person. Nothing was working. But then this strange thing happened to me in this mental hospital. Everything changed, almost overnight. And the Lord has led me ever since. And I've seen it happen to other people. Now, this organization, Full Gospel Businessmen, people come and share their testimony. I went to Bible school eventually. I've seen many people share their testimony. You're probably in your life going to hear more people share their testimony. Here's the spoiler for any testimony. If you've been touched by the Lord and something flips inside of you the way it did for me, you aren't the same person anymore. Your whole, I was thinking about it today. I felt like I was a Land Rover, like just pedal to the floor, driving through the wilderness, and all of a sudden someone took my car, put me on the nicest highway, and pointed me in the right direction. That's what it felt like. I was lost completely, out of control. And someone took me and put me right back on the path again. The path going somewhere good. Amen. Now, since then, just at university, I had girlfriends. He was a musician just like me, and he followed a particular path, but never did have this experience that I had. And 10 years ago, 2016, right, we all knew him. He passed away from, my brother died from what's called sepsis, which is basically needle drug infections, right? But my brother was so massively infected and addicted to needle drugs by that point in his life that he died. He actually died just downtown here in Regina. So, again, when I see some of these fellas in the hood, in North Central here, it really reminds me of my life and also of my brother. So I lost him in 2016. And me and my brother were quite close. I mean, I didn't bring him up much as I was talking, but our lives really did follow this particular path. And we did diverge. I came to Christ, Josh never did. He did come out and he did sort of experience church, and he got to know our church family a bit. But he never really did get freedom from this, and it did take him. And it's very sad. He was just found, his body was found in an apartment, essentially. That's how his life ended. And we buried him in 2016, so it was very sad. Yeah, so like Lee was saying, I've been really blessed, I'd say, my life since that it was 1989 when I came to Christ. So this whole experience with the mental hospital and everything happened in 1989. And by 1999, I was in Regina. I had met Lynette for the first time, but that's one of my oldest friends as a believer. I met Lynette, within probably a year of becoming a Christian. When I was young, she was in a dance group, and her dance group danced at our church, and that's how we met. I met a lot of people from Harvest City at that time, Nathan Tarr, and Bernard McQuabi, and Matthew Dalton, and all my old friends from Harvest City. I met them the first time in Yorkton when we were there. So the Lord, if I look back now, God led me on this weird path throughout my life, and I actually think that He was with me the whole time. I know he wasn't like a direct part of my life, and I wasn't like acknowledging him, and I didn't even know him until later, but I really feel like God led me from my home in the east all the way here to Saskatchewan. The reason I moved to Regina is there's a Bible school here, and I came here to go to Bible school, and then when I finished Bible school, they placed me in a church, and it was the best church ever because I met my pastor at the time, Mr. Povey, Glenn and Julie Povey, who were my pastors for most of my Christian life, and it was wonderful to work with them, and they were the best people probably out of the entire country I could have been placed with, and I worked with them for over 20 years, so it was a wonderful thing. Jesus has given me a new heart, he's given me a new mind, he's healed my body. I was at Bible school for 3 years. I did eventually go back to university, although I never did finish my degree. Maybe I will. I became a youth pastor. That was my first job as a Christian. And I worked as a youth pastor for 8 years before I got married. I got married in 2008. And wonderful woman, like really wonderful. I'm not even going to go there. It's just an incredible person I married. And I have 2 children now. I met not just Mr. and Mrs. Povey, I met a lot of really good Christian leaders in my life, and that's been probably the thing that stabilized me the most, because coming to Christ is one thing, but you need discipleship, you need mentoring, you need good examples, you need people around you praying for you and leading and guiding you. So if you're a person who's coming to faith or has come to faith, I'd encourage you to get into a good church and meet some good Christian people. The older the better. Okay, honestly. I know it sounds funny, but older Christian men to me are probably the very people that are going to save you in the end, because they have so much more wisdom than you do. And it's very unassuming sometimes to meet an older Christian guy, men like Sam over here. And I work with Sam now, but just a guy like that, an older Christian man, is a wonderful thing to a person to know when you're growing up in the Lord. They genuinely appreciate me, they my work and the things that I invest in the church. So I've been really blessed that way. A lot of people from Harvest City poured into my life before I went to Morning Star as well. One thing that happened out here, and I've really come to appreciate Indigenous culture and Indigenous people. I only say that to say that our church is really has a heart for that group. And now that like I said earlier, I drive through North Central, I see a lot of Indigenous men and women who are under the same addictions issues that I had when I was young. And boy, it really breaks my heart, but it also, I can really relate. And so I pray for those people. And I really, the other thing is, I've met a lot of like stable, healthy, good Indigenous people, and learned to really appreciate them. They become good, solid friends of mine. I never would have thought that. I grew up around the French community, so where I come from, it's mostly like French Canadians, bilingual people. And the big issue where we come from is the French-English issue. It's not like it is out here. But I'm really glad I got to experience that when I moved out here. I love it. So, I traveled a lot since I've become a Christian. I've been around the world a bit, not completely. I'd like to travel some more. I've been to Europe, US, Mexico. Since then, you know, I talked about how when I lived in Halifax, I lived in this huge group of people who were had a music scene. It's always been a part of my life, doing music and loving music, and I eventually went to RCM, got my theory class through RCM, Royal Conservatory of Music, and I started teaching music. So I teach guitar, I teach bass. I still to this day do that. I did that for almost 20 years. Well, sorry, 16 or 15 years. After I got married, it was my job. So I've been teaching music for a long time. And I play on a worship team. I played on a worship team since probably the first time I met Lynette. that thing you came to, that was probably the first time I ever led worship, was that little event that you came to that time. That was in the late 90s. So I've been leading worship since then. Yeah, I still play in a band, just for fun, a lot of it. The most important thing in my life right now is my wife and my 2 children. I have a little boy and a little girl. And the Lord has given me the ability to work, to learn, to lead in ministry. And He's taught me a lot about forgiveness. And this is something I desperately needed. And I'm almost 50 years old now. And one thing that I really struggle to get a hold of is this particular issue. 2 things: offense and forgiveness. And this is something the Lord is even teaching me now. To get over any offense that I have with my family, my friends, even the people from my past, and to learn to walk in God's forgiveness, those two items are massive. Because I felt like I was offended on, I offended, I lived in offense, and the only way out of it was the Lord's mercy. And his mercy was based upon his forgiving power that he displays. And if you read Scripture, that's really what he's doing. The Bible, okay? The message of the Bible is this: God's forgiven us, he's forgiven me, he's forgiven you, and he's going to make this clean break, but we have to walk in forgiveness from this point forward. It's a daily thing. And it's something that I really struggled with, but the Lord has freed me. And again, like I said earlier, my family, I think, really struggled with this, and still to this day does. And the Lord is still leading and guiding and bringing me into a place of forgiveness, and I pray that for them as well, and I pray it for you. So God bless you. Thank you for letting me talk. I'm not someone who likes to share a lot of these deeper things. You probably have heard tonight more about me in some ways than some of my closest friends don't know some of this stuff. So I'm inviting you into my psychological world, so you know, you've got to experience it in a way that others haven't. So, yeah. Anyway, God bless you guys. Thank you for letting me share.